Welcome to the Hot Topics Gaming and Language Learning presentation. My name is Ellen Doherty. I'm a member of the CALL IS, and I'd like to invite you all to join our CALL IS. As you can see, we have lots of fun setting up things and work together and really solve a lot of problems, and it's really quite fun. This session is being webcasted. We have 4 different presenters. Steve Daniel Christmas from Texas Christian University will be speaking first. Rima Abubakar from Washington State University will be speaking second. Begum Sakak and Saida Hosseini will be speaking third. And we may have a Skype in. We're not quite sure, but we may have Heike Phillips speaking from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I'd like to introduce, first of all, Steve Daniel Christmas, Texas Christian University. His topic is CALL's role in supporting transnational youth beyond the classroom, encouraging game ecology language socialization spaces. Steve.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ellen, for that introduction. It's an honor for me to be here sharing with you this afternoon and sharing with my colleagues as well, co-presenters. And as Ellen said, I'm going to talk about CALL's role in serving the needs of transnational students through game ecology, language, and identity socialization. I want to start with a conclusion, in case I don't get there. We'll all have seen it. And this comes from Starhawk's 1988 book. And I've marked some of the words that are important to me and for this presentation. We are all longing to go home, to some place we have never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned, we can only catch glimpses of from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter. A circle of healing, a circle of friends. Someplace where we can be free. When we think about transnational students, many of them are living in a home that they have never known before. And it's our job as educators to create spaces for them to have community. Community that honors their strengths, their assets, and provides and encourages friendships, a place for healing. So my agenda today, I'm going to briefly talk about transnational children. We like to create categories for groups of people, but by no means are transnational children homogeneous. So I'm going to talk about different groups of transnational children. Wrap their experiences around the frameworks of community of practice, language socialization, identity, and education. Talk about something that may be familiar a bit to some of you, but a little bit different, the idea of blended affinity spaces. What my colleagues and I think the game ecology is, the valued role of English in the game ecology, and then I'm going to share examples from metagame discourse, intra-game discourse, and then share voices of transnational students on both sides of the US-Mexico border. I realize as I'm talking about the border, I'm closer to the Canadian border as I speak than I am the Mexico border, but in my context in Texas and where I came from before that in southern Arizona, I work with a lot of families and transnational children that flow back and forth between the Mexico-US border. And then I'll finish with next steps for us as educators. So my goal is not to convince you that there's great potential of literacy development in gaming. I think we all agree on that. My goal is to perhaps convince you that the game ecology has a place in schools, and that it perhaps might not be in the classroom, although I may learn from my colleagues here, my co-presenters, that that there's potential for it in the classroom as well. And in creating spaces at school for game ecology language socialization, we promote positive educational life experiences of transnational children. So let's jump into this. Who are transnational children? A lot of scholars in the last decade have been doing a lot of great work describing the life experiences of transnational children, especially Victor Zuniga from Monterrey in Mexico. We can estimate there are at least, and perhaps even more when you bring in different contexts, 1.5 million children of international migration. Some of them are who we call 1.5 generation migrants, and these are children who come to the United States and are still here. Throughout TESOL, we call them different names: English language learners, emergent bilinguals. The reality is a lot of times they're caught between generations. They don't feel like they're part of a generation from the country they just left, and they're not accepted yet in the generation of the country where they're now living. Another group of individuals are children who are born in a country, and I'm going to use Mexico as my example. Born in Mexico, and many times at a very young age, move to the United States with their families, live in the United States for many years, attend school in the United States, but then return back to Mexico because of deportation, oftentimes not being able to speak Spanish or have never been in Mexico with any memory. And then there are international migrants. These are US-born children to families that have Mexican heritage, spend a lot of time in the United States, attend school in the United States, but then move with their families back to Mexico via deportation as well, and find themselves in a new home that they don't know, many not speaking Spanish or being made fun of the Spanish that they do use. I'm going to focus for the rest of my time on these last two categories, and what we can learn about serving them can also inform how we serve students here in the US as well. So who's talking about transnational children in Mexican schools, and how am I going to relate this to gaming? First of all, I'm going to briefly run through a bunch of articles to show you that people are talking about this. Transnational children in Mexico, counter-migration, divided families, fractured schooling, going home to a place you've never been to, incorporation of migrant students returning from the US to Mexico, deported to Mexico, return migration, American children now struggling to adjust to life in Mexico, Pensando en Cintia, educational implications of US-Mexico transnationalism. So it goes on, and a lot of people are describing the life experiences of these children who are now finding themselves in a new home. But what I want to do is go a little further than that today. Not just describe their experiences, but try to find a solution, something we can offer to schools and educators and teachers and parents and transnational children themselves as an outlet for finding friendship, acceptance at school, English, Spanish, language socialization, academic success. And in a forthcoming book chapter that I have with a colleague from the University of Arizona, we put forth the idea of online gaming as this avenue to reach these students. So if we can open up an online gaming community of practice, we see that these are areas where people who share a concern or a passion for something they do learn how to do it better when they interact with each other all the time. Not only do they learn how to do something better, but they get language socialization or the apprenticeship into new communities, new linguistic, new cultural communities. So G and Hayes gave us the term affinity spaces that you may be familiar with, and these are virtual and physical locations where groups of people are drawn together because of a shared interest, a shared affinity. When I think about these, this really makes sense for online gaming. You meet people online, you develop anonymous identities when you play, you experiment with language, My only concern is you may not always be interacting with people in your immediate physical context. So you could have a student who plays at home in online games and develops a lot of English, but when they go to school the next day, no one knows them in that context. So they get positioned at school as different, other, learner, not good at something. So the idea of a blended affinity space is making sure that there is a blended mix of peers from the same educational community participating together, so that these students can reposition themselves at school where they need to be seen as a gamer instead of just someone who's different. So that's the crux of my argument, that schools need to provide spaces for kids, especially transnational students, to experiment with online gaming. I've been doing this for the last 5 or 8 years in the United States with a program called the ELL Ambassadors Program. In schools in Nebraska, Arizona, and now in Texas, we've been creating blended affinity spaces at school where 1.5 generation immigrants, transnational students, play online games with other peers at the school, and then that forms friendship and acceptance for them. And my idea is, what would this look like in Mexican schools for children returnees? First of all, students that participated in these in the United States have had a lot of great things to say. They've said that somehow it's given them knowledge of the language. It's made them easier to communicate with teachers and students. And in fact, we've been gathering data on their academics, and after participating in blended affinity spaces, they've been doing better in their classes, and we think it has to do with just more support network, friends sharing homework and studying with them, and just being engaged and accepted and feeling part of the school. When asked to give their feedback, these participants said, I would tell others to participate right away. It would improve their English. Any group or club will actually help you because you're having fun while you do it. And then a little bit of translanguaging here, that they tienen que perder la vergüenza, get rid of their shame, try harder, keep going, and never give up. So if we put this in the Mexican context for children returnees, what do they have? What skills and assets do they have that would allow them to be welcomed into gaming clubs in Mexican schools? What interests and skills do they potentially bring with them? They may be interested in gaming, not all of them, but a lot of them might be. But one thing that overlaps with gaming that they will bring with them to their new homes and schools in Mexico is their proficiency in English. Having lived in the United States and attended school in the United States, they bring with them a level of English that will be oftentimes much higher than their new classmates in their Mexican schools. So then, what role does English have in the game ecology? So my colleagues and I that are researching this with me, we refer to game ecology as including two things: the metagame discourse, or the talk about playing, before, during, and after. This could be in person, sharing tips about getting to the next level, or tips about being successful in a game. It could be online in chat groups or blogs. And the other part of the game ecology we consider to be the intra-game discourse, or the actual interacting with others from around the world within the game interface. Your characters that you create in these spaces, creating language and interacting with others. So what's the valued role of English in online gaming? Because of the use of English in these massively multiplayer online role-playing games, you have a greater chance of communicating, especially in intercultural servers. And if we look at the international server of Final Fantasy, we can see that 9 out of the 12 servers are some form of English. If we look at some screenshots of games like this one, we can see all the literacy in English that one would need to understand that this event is going to take place. In the actual game, I know this is blurry, but you can see all of the literacy, all of the English that takes place in the intra-game-ecology. And we're going to hear from voices of actual gamers here in a second, telling us what it means to be able to speak English or understand English while playing. If you watch Twitch, now this happens to be in English, but even the players that play in other languages, the area around the screen is often, almost always in English. The post-game ecology literacy. When students, like in this blog post on Reddit, talk about playing, oftentimes they talk in English and even talk about what it means to play. The first person says, as boring as it sounds, a large vocabulary and decent grasp of spelling and grammar from quests and such. So actually, meta-game discourse about language learning on blogs. So what do transnational children themselves say about playing games and the potential of creating blended affinity spaces in schools? Cuauhtemoc and Zelda, these are all pseudonyms, now live in the United States but have a lot of family in Mexico. They play a variety of different games, and they say when they talk about the games, the metagame discourse, they talk in Spanish. But when they play the game, the intra-game discourse, they talk or use English. And they say that their English proficiency positions them with roles of explaining what is going on in the inter-game discourse. Zelda says, while playing with cousins, they would ask me a lot about what things meant in English. Cuauhtemoc says, while playing with extended family and friends in Mexico, I often tried to explain gaming tips and strategies first in Spanish, but then got frustrated and switched to English. And he recognized in these moments how important it was to be able to speak English in these communities of practice. Now, a couple perspectives from transnational students living in Mexico. Panda and William, they both live in Mexico. Panda lived in the United States for 11 years before returning to Mexico. William lived in the United States and attended school for 16 years prior to returning to Mexico. Both were gamers in the US. Panda reported that he would have loved to have had blended affinity spaces when he returned to Mexico. He said that this would help children feel more comfortable, make friends with other gamers, and help students learn Spanish and English. William shared that communicating with others in Spanish was the hardest thing for him when he returned to Mexico. He said that creating clubs for gaming at school, or at least supported by school people, would be nice, such as the gaming club at his old school in the United States. So to conclude, the potential implications for transnational children for encouraging game ecology groups and clubs at school are these are communities of practice for language socialization and identity formation. Students, like transnational students who have high proficiency in English, can use this as a linguistic and cultural capital to be valued members of gaming communities that provides them for Spanish-English language socialization, positive identity construction, and access to resources and support for academic success. Next steps, when I always say, can you envision creating blended affinity spaces at your school for online gaming? What would it take? These systems can be expensive, you need space, doesn't necessarily have to be at school, but needs to be encouraged by school so that the transnational students play with peers in their new context. So I thank you very much for your attention.
We have time for a couple of questions from the audience. I have a question. If you could repeat the question after I say it for the online audience. Are you a gamer yourself? And how much has your gaming influenced your research?
This is a great question. The question is, am I a gamer myself? And how much has my gaming influenced my resource? You may be surprised, although maybe not. I am not a gamer. My research is in identity, and I have a lot of friends that are gamers, including my co-author to this most recent book chapter. I have played, and I worry that if I played more, I would get lost in the trees and be so interested that I would lose sight of what I want to talk about with identity and language socialization. So I respect it to a great deal. I love watching students play, and but no, I'm not.
So you bring a different perspective?
That's what I hope. I bring a different perspective. Thank you.
I'd like to now invite Begum Sakar and Saida Hosseini to come up. And they're going to be speaking about games and language learning, an exploration of MMORPGs, we'll let them explain what that is, and English language learners' perceived identity.
Thank you so much for coming to our session. And well, first of all, I should thank you, Steve, for presenting your nice research. So our, well, I can say theoretical part of the research is based on G's and then the theories of cognitive practice and Noether-Pierce's magic of ability and investments in language learning. So Begum and I, we actually combined our theoretical perspectives into this study, and we're hoping to actually carry out the research.
Thank you all for coming here. Can you hear me, by the way? Okay, I just want to make sure before every presentation because I have a little voice. So with my colleagues, like we told you that we wanted to be involved with MMORPGs and how identity construction works in MMORPGs. So because identity is the most important thing for us that we rarely talk about, but it's something that reflects itself everywhere and even in gameplay and language learning process, of course. So we'll start with a brief description of what MMORPG is, though our colleague also introduced it a little bit. Basically, MMORPG stands for Massive Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Games. So these games, these games are interactive games, basically taking place in a virtual world. And these can be defined as online virtually constructed fantasy worlds. So game players log in or come to this world and they interact with other players, and they also work on their character building activities, and they try to progress through the game. So that's a very important thing actually that we would like to mention, because this is not just a game that you just log in and the other day you forget. So if you get involved with this game, actually you can continue with your character, and you can build on your character development. So I was wondering how many people played MMORPGs here? Awesome. I understood that from the nods that I got from you, so an MMORPG player right there. Awesome. So these games are out there for a while, but it's very recent that we started integrating these games into educational practices, and we are trying to see what kind of impacts that they have on our language learning practice. Here I will be talking about the significance of MMORPGs in second language learning. So basically, the problem is language teachers, experts, is that the conversational proficiency, attaining conversational proficiency is hard for our students because they rarely have the opportunity to interact with other people. And it's very important for them to improve their listening, writing, speaking skills. And it's also very important that they have this opportunity to practice these skills with native language learners or other speakers, other people who speak English. So, well, MMORPGs actually grant this opportunity to students. So, when somebody plays an MMORPG, basically you want to achieve some sort of goal, you want to play, you want to accomplish some quests, and then and this might result in the development of your character, improvement of your character, and then you progress through the game. So basically, you have to interact with people, and this interaction should be meaningful, and most importantly, it should be a well-formed interaction. So not just like a momentary, but if you want to succeed in the long term, maybe you might want to keep these interactions as our proficient game player can also support, that you might want to construct well-formed relationships with these people. So we talked about this sort of MMORPGs as effective platforms for community of practice. So basically, people can interact with other people, they can form meaningful relationships. Actually, you might have heard that there are some people who actually get so involved that, like, they get married, like they form, lifelong relationships, or they meet outside of the online community. So it can be very powerful for people, these kind of interactions. Basically, this meaningful interaction, this meaningful relationship arises as a result of the interaction they have. And the nature of this interaction is usually driven by those tasks, because they all work towards a common goal, and you usually do that with the help of your peers or people who are playing these games with you. Okay. So here we'll talk a little bit about community of practice, learning, and identity.
So it's very interesting because my research is generated in second language learning, and when I talk to them about my topic, they just said, well, I found something related to identity with MMORPGs, so well, this is really how to, let's just compare and synthesize these two, actually theories, the theories of Gs in MMORPG games, and then or just games in general, and also the post-structural theories of identity. So, well, actually, according to Wenger, identity is defined through learning. So, learning, in this case, and in his point of view, is not a product. It's not something that you achieve at it. It's a process of becoming. So, learning here is not an individual act, it's a social process, and it is achieved through participation and activities that each person has in everyday life. And it is not only based on formal instruction and teaching. And moreover, Lavin Wenger then said that as we go through the learning process, we may form different identities. And the identities that we form can actually shape our learning process too. So we see that the identities actually are the products of people's participation and membership in the communities. And in the case of MMORPG, we see that here the actual cyber environments are considered like communities of practice in which the players interact, not face-to-face, but in virtually oriented social interactions with the native speakers. And as they play these games with the native speakers, they learn the language, and moreover, they form their identities, and well, in some cases, they reconstruct identities. Now, let's see what kind of identities G referred to in his research, and see how we can actually equate the identities that he introduced with the post-structural theories of identity.
So we'll be talking about, like my colleague said, James Paul G's identity definitions. Of course, we cannot see the boundaries, like there are no clear boundaries between these identities. However, there are important definitions to understand how identity is constructed in games, especially. So the first one, the first definition he has here is real-world identity. So basically, the real-world identity is our identities that we constructed in our real world. So every one of you has a real-world identity right now, and well, basically referring to a non-virtual person playing a computer game. So a real-world identity can directly or indirectly influence the kind of identity that you construct in the games, and we can say that it's the essential identity, sort of like the foundation for other identities.
And the second type of identity, or the second stage that the learners get through, and they achieve this identity with the MMORPG games, is projective identity. Well, it has a root in person's real identity for sure, and it originates from that. And well, the definition is that the projective identity is the projection of values and desires onto the virtual characters. So in other words, the real life people, in this case the MMORPG language learners or language players, they try to achieve things through their characters, so they assign them activities and quests to follow. Well, in this sense then, by doing so, they achieve a kind of identity which is called projective identity, and it is very equal to what Norton refers to as magic community. So when actually language learners in general, based on Norton's idea, when language learners see the future possibilities in the community of practice, then they form all these desires and motives that they have. They form kind of imagined community in their minds, and these imagined communities constitute their imagined identities. And based on these imagined identities, they can invest in second language learning. And the third one is virtual identity.
So virtual identity is, it stands for, sorry. So virtual identity stands for the type of identity which is created for the gameplay. Basically, I think if you're a gamer or if you have been in gaming environments, I think we have all been through that process of creating a character, and you have, depending on how you form it, you just have something that looks like you maybe, or that doesn't look like you maybe, but that desire that you have, like a strong character or like some sort of magical creature. So the virtual, basically the virtual identity is closely related to the character that you actually create. We have a problem here.
Well, actually, it's something picture. explain. No, I need.
That's our next presenter who's coming earlier online, so that's why there's been a problem. So it's just-
This one.
Yeah. How long have you got?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks. So here we see the 3 stages of identity formation, or identity construction and reconstruction that emerging language learners go through. So the first one, as we mentioned, is real-world identity, and then through the projective identity, or the imagined identity that they form in their minds, they can reach to virtual identity, which is the desirable identity that they want to have and acquire. So you see the projective identity somehow links into the virtual identity, and it has a very great role in making that virtual identity work in real life.
So here is the connection that we have with identity and MMORPGs and language learning. Well, basically, I would like to read this quote to you. Deep learning requires an extended commitment, and commitment is powerfully recruited when people take on a new identity they value and in which they become heavily invested. Whether this be a child being a scientist doing science in a classroom, or an adult taking on a new role at work. So basically, when they take this new identity, the projective identity, the players or language learners actually care about what they create, and they want to invest in this identity.
So this will lead actually to learning, and this is very important, because when you have investment in new identities, when you want to create a new identity through your imagined identity, and then you put it into practice by assigning roles to your characters in the game, then you actually can invest in language learning at the same time, because you see the possibilities of success. Because you say, well, if I look like this character, then I can interact more, I can learn language more. So investment in identity will lead to investments in language learning, which is very good, well, and for all the language learners to play such games.
Also, there are some previous research we included. Some previous research suggests that games are promising, MMORPGs are promising tools for language learning for a variety of reasons. So one of them is that they actually enable collaboration among players. So basically, the players engage in guilds. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Guilds are collaborative relationships developed by gameplay and alliance to high-level learning tasks. So, like we talked about it at the beginning of our presentation, actually the game players can collaborate with each other to accomplish some tasks, and this creates some sort of meaning when they play these games. And they also, learners also want to be a part of these role-playing games, first of all for the purposes of winning the game, and they are very motivated usually because we usually want to win or be successful in these games, and then the collaboration with peers actually helps us to achieve our goals. So, as a result, they are also motivated to interacting with people from different backgrounds in these games. And another very important thing that we didn't really talk about here is that there's an existence of a non-threatening environment. So basically, compared to practicing language in real world, actually you can be more comfortable if you are in a game environment like that. And even if you're a shy student or someone like that, you can still choose to communicate with others. And it lowers the risk of failure since it's an online environment.
And well, this is the idea for the future research that can be done by us or by anyone who's interested. So we want to see what is the connection between emoji, language players, identity, and second language learning. So we wanted to actually have a synthesis of the theoretical frameworks of Norton's Imagine Community and Investment in Second Language Learning, and these three stages of identity that the learners go through. Just on a side note, I wanted to say that, motivation in second language learning is somehow not accepted anymore because, when we say motivation, this is a kind of personal characteristic which is very fixed and very stable. But Norton is a pioneer, and she replaced this psychological concept of motivation with the sociological construct of investment in second language learning, because it's the investment that shows the relationship between second language learners and their changing worlds. However, motivation is just a psychological factor. You're either motivated or not. Thank you so much. So if you have any questions.
Are you gamers?
Somehow. I myself, I've never played MMORPG games, but the other games, yes.
I'm sort of.
And then how does that influence your research?
Actually, we ourselves, we wouldn't consider ourselves as big gamers, but I witnessed people who play those games and who are extremely motivated when they play those games. Like, for instance, my cousin, he taught himself English just by playing online games. So I was always amazed seeing people learning so much just by playing those games, and I think this is why we are kind of, focusing on this interesting field. We want to explore what is out there for language learners.
That's a side note. Well, to me, I think formal instruction for adults is really, the result is not that much promising, because presenting the rules, the grammatical rules of vocabulary, adults become so tired. But through games, they have fun and enjoyment, plus they learn indirectly. Yes.
Not really a question, but a comment, because I had never really thought about it this way, but if you're playing a game with a largely English-speaking population, even if you're in an EFL setting, you're really in an ESL setting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting. It's because you're putting yourself remotely into an English as a second language setting. It's everything around you is native, and so that's interesting. How you can go into a hybrid
suddenly
reality.
transport into an ESL setting.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
neat.
Thank you very much.
Can you please keep it, because the next person is going to.
It's really quick. I was just going to ask if you have any game recommendations for ELL.
Yes.
Any specific games?
For recommendations for teachers or for students?
Students.
Well, if they, adults, I think they have just some effective filters. Oh, why should we play games? We're adults. But through playing games, actually they can be exposed to more up-to-date, probably language, informal language of.
I was just asking for game titles.
Well, actually, the most popular commercial MMORPGs, I think World of Warcraft, League of Legends. So we can, let's do this. At the end of the presentation, we can exchange ideas and see what.
And that question leads nicely into our next presenter. Our next presenter is going to be coming in online, and her name is Heike Phillip. She is at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and she's going to be talking about Village, virtual language learning and gaming environment. And if you give us just a second, we're going to switch to a online stream of Heike speaking. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak, if I can, until it comes up. I've worked with Heike before, and she's on, so we'll get her to come on. Are you there, Heike?
Hello, I'm there. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi. it's Ellen here. I'm going to turn you over to the audience. You can begin.
Fantastic. Are you actually seeing me as well with my webcam?
You'll be up here in a minute. The online environment has you, but if you can just begin speaking. I was beginning to sing your praises and tell me a little bit about your virtual work.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing my presentation on the screen. Sorry about, the left-hand side. There you go. Thank you very much for hosting me. I have just come back from Brussels, where I've been yesterday, with a sunny day in Brussels, will you believe it or not, in the city where it rains a lot. I'm now back in Germany, where I live at the moment, and I greet you all in Seattle. So, I wish I was there, honestly. I wish I was able to spend the time with you, associate with you, and thank you very much for listening to just the next 10 minutes or so about what we have been doing in the area of games in a virtual world. Now, a virtual world normally, we kept saying for many years, this is a virtual world, this is not a game. And if suddenly we come up and say, yes, it is a game. Unfortunately, you cannot see my webcam. Or do you see my webcam? Oh, yes, you do. Okay, excellent. Village has been an EVO session, and we've heard earlier about EVO sessions. We've been in a virtual world called Second Life for a while, but it's not only Second Life, it is also a couple of open sim installations that we've been working to develop games in a virtual environment. Now, really, truly speaking, the motivation has come from the area of open sim. Now, what is OpenSim? OpenSim is almost an identical copy of Second Life, but installed on a server, a private virtual world that is more or less only on your server. Now, in the last couple of years, these private installations worldwide, many universities have them, many schools have them, individual people have them, have kind of joined together in what's known hypergridding. So I could, with my avatar, which is my beautifully slim 3D representation of myself, I can hop from world to world. However, in OpenSim, essentially, there's a beautiful 3D environment without any people. Whereas in Second Life, we know we can always go into Second Life and meet somebody and speak English, practice English. In an OpenSim installation, you can't. So the teachers who took the children into this safe environment were stuck at one time saying, what can we do with it? So this is how it becomes sort of a challenge for us to develop games, and language learning, speaking and activity games in a virtual environment. And what we did is we tried to empower the teachers to do so. Now I'm going to forward the slides a little bit now. Sorry, it's not that I'm stuck with the slides. I wanted to show you, that we went and we had this idea of scribble in a virtual world initially. Went into it, and I would like to show you a little video trying to switch the sound to stereo sound so that you hear the. Please, could you give me a feedback, best on YouTube, whether you're actually hearing the people speaking in the video. So I have to change all. Are you hearing it?
No.
One second. Not hearing. Okay, hang on. I would have to stop screen sharing quickly to change the audio.
Trying to troubleshoot an audio issue with the journal and we're here.
Noch keine Website. Erstelle dir einfach.
It's a sentence-making board game. You've got 3 dice to roll. On one die there are numbers from 1 to 6, of course. And on one of the other die there are 3 symbols for affirmative, negative, and question.
Yes, just a board on tapping and asking for the time. I used this image of this clock and I put some sounds inside. Particularly if you touch a clock, quarter past, half past, and quarter to, you can listen to the sound.
As we entered the maze, we found questions on the path. If we could answer the questions correctly, then we would work our way through the maze. But if we answered the question wrongly, then we had to click on the ball and teleport back to the question. Or actually take told us the answer and explained why and how the answer was right. So children would learn if they were wrong.
Thank you for stepping in. Thank you so much. So, do you hear me again?
Yes, about 5
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much. What I wanted to demonstrate with the video is the wonderful, wonderful productions of the teachers in Evo Village, but also in other methodology courses that we've done ever since, because we were just blown away by the creativity and the ingenuity of how teachers started. We only taught them how to build and script, and then they came with beautiful games. So it was first to actually also create games in a virtual environment. And this has been the biggest sort of aha, for us, greatest excitement to see that we can empower people to do it themselves. And I want to share with you just now.
That's it.
I think that
That's
might
your
be-
show.
However,
All right.
I think we should close the session, or have we finished?
Well, you can ask me your question.
Okay, so I can't answer any questions, but
They
the
can
man
ask
over here
questions.
that is webcasting can answer questions, but the session is over because we have another one that starts in about 10 minutes. Time for us to be able to, two questions. Okay, two questions. Anybody have any questions for Dan Stevens, a colleague of Hankey's? Yes? To answer your question?
I don't understand what that last one was.
Well, while Vance comes
Okay,
over, I'm going to,
Just checking the time.
we have about 2
Going to
minutes.
2:50. We have a minute.
We've got a minute. And while he's ready to come up, it's a virtual environment where you practice your language.
Well, that was hiking film. Is being in Second Life and communities of practice and virtual conferences. If you Google her, you'll find quite a lot of information about it. What she just showed us was an electronic village online community that she's developed, starting in Second Life, and they've sort of evolved into games. So they're developing games in Second Life for language learning. So she was just showing how people who were in that community practice in the EVO session were learning how to, they were showing them the basic scripts, and from those they made their games. And before that she was into virtual media. What's the film? Something, machinima. So she's been experimenting with lots of interesting storytelling, games playing concepts using virtual environments. So you got to see some of that. And by the way, we didn't even know she was presenting until we started this session. We saw she was on the program. We said, well, where is she? And well, she's not here. And so we contacted her, and she said, oh, I thought I was supposed to be in a webinar. And I said, no, you're live in Seattle. She said, oh, let me get dressed. And so anyway, there you are. So we brought her here, and
Can I add something to it? I'm not really very good with computers, but I love them, and I do research on it. And to answer the question that was asked, how do you use this with language learning? I taught a course in graduate studies on how to use technology with students, specifically gaming. So what Vance did and Heike did is they went into, and this was a while ago, Second Life, which is a big virtual environment, and they took my students through this Second Life environment so they experienced firsthand what it was like to be second language learners. You took them to a university. I suppose many of the big universities have sites where you can practice your language skills. So really it's incredible. So talk to this man if you have more questions, and we're going to end the session because we have another one coming up. Thank you very much for coming. Presenters, thank you.